In South Africa, electricity prices have increased 390% since 2008. So the push to find cheaper alternative energy sources is becoming more important as consumers face significant economic pressures. Joining me now for a look at some of those alternatives is SolarAfrica's co-founder and CEO, James Irons. James, thank you so much for joining us here on Business Day TV. Let's walk us through some of the projects that you're involved in, especially this one where we're standing right now.
This is a solar system that we did at the Midstream Medical Center. It's about a 70 kilowatt system. So this is in fact a dual purpose carport. So we use the carport to basically place the panels on top of the carport. Panels are used to generate what's called DC energy, and the DC power will feed into these three inverters behind us, which basically converts the energy into something that is exactly the same electricity that you get out of your plug.
Solar has been criticized as being too expensive and therefore not accessible for most South Africans looking to dodge Eskom's price hikes. How are you addressing this challenge?
So I think that's obviously one of the biggest barriers that us as a business try to overcome. Solar is expensive. It has obviously come down in price considerably over the last 3 to 4 years, and certainly since we started the business. What's probably most interesting about solar is, although the upfront cost is fairly large, where it's got to from a cost of kilowatt hour. So basically, you as a homeowner or a business or somebody in a residential complex can effectively generate electricity with solar at a price that's competitive now with the same type of electricity that's been delivered by the utility or the municipality. So even with that upfront cost that's fairly large, if you put that aside, we're getting to a point now where solar is very competitive with alternative sources of electricity, so generators or even the grid. And that's obviously going to have profound effects on how people generate and consume electricity going into the future.
How big is that saving?
So that's very dependent on where you are. So we don't, as you know, operate only in South Africa, so we do systems in Africa as well. If you're competing against a generator, for example, those savings can be quite considerable. If you're competing against various tariffs, so South Africa has a fairly complex tariff structure. If you are in a municipality with residential rates of a certain band, that saving can be considerable. So with a solar system, you can save anywhere from 20 to 30% on that tariff price. So it's in a very exciting space right now where solar is. I think there's a large amount of education that still needs to effectively the customer still needs to be educated on what solar can and cannot do, and obviously that's largely as what us as a business we're trying to achieve. Yeah.
NERSA has approved an Eskom rate hike of 9.4% this year, and it's set to raise 8% per annum going forward. How do you deal with price increases? So
I think to appreciate that Eskom versus a service provider like ourselves, we have a very different cost base. Our cost base is effectively the solar installation components. There's the soft cost of getting that system delivered to the site. And both of those costs are on a downward trajectory. So, amidst all this chaos of load shedding and price increases, you've had solar panels, have quite a dramatic drop in cost, and that's allowed us to deliver a fairly competitive product. And once that product is locked in, those increases, so we do have a monthly increase, but that's effectively tied to CPI +1, depends where you are and the type of product we have. Versus, unfortunately, the situation that Eskom and many other utilities in Africa find themselves. They are often in build programs, so they are currently installing new generation capacity, and they need the revenue to fund these programs. So a lot of these tariffs are moving more to cost-reflective tariffs, and that is expensive. So the inputs are also expensive, so they often run oil or coal or gas or nuclear. Is obviously some of the new add-ons that some of the countries are looking at, and you put that all together, the trajectory of somewhere like a local utility versus the trajectory of our costs are in two different directions. So yes, we do have an annual increase, but it's something that we can control because our input is effectively free once that system is in place, and that's obviously the solar resource that's available there. Yeah. Okay.
Where do you source your materials from?
The majority of the panels and these inverters behind us would come from somewhere like China or or Germany.
You mostly source your materials, as you said, from China at a time when the rand is weakening significantly. How much of a factor does this play in your cost base?
The rand does have a huge impact of what that system costs to actually install. There is the equipment component, which is very much dollar-based or euro-based. Which is largely something that we can't control. I think there's very little point in hedging a lot of those costs. The components of the equation that we can control is your softer costs. And as a business, what we try and do effectively is to try and reduce those soft costs quite considerably. So those costs would be stuff like installation costs, custom acquisition costs, and all of those costs which can make up a fair amount of the actual end system, particularly where the hardware has got to. Those aren't necessarily the rand dollar price, but certainly whenever there is a large movement in the rand dollar price, it does put pressure on what we can deliver at the end. Yeah.
95% of the world's population without grid access live in sub-Saharan Africa. You already have projects in 4 African countries, in East and Southern Africa. What would be your focus in the medium term?
West Africa is definitely on the horizon. We're already looking at a couple of sites in Ghana to start. The whole equation, or the cost of locally produced energy in Ghana, for example, is considerably more expensive than South Africa. We complain a lot about load shedding here, but over there, it's considerably worse as well. So all of the same dynamics that you're starting to see at play in South Africa are already at an advanced stage in Ghana, and it's very viable for a local commercial centre or a shopping or a factory to be using solar as an alternative. That's certainly what we built the model around, was to be able to deliver those systems on a basis that can attract capital to invest in those systems. Yeah.
James, thank you so much for your time. James Irons is the co-founder and CEO of SolarAfrica.